présence d'une icône mondiale de la protection animale. C'est un événement que l'UNESCO organise en partenariat avec le Jane Goodall Institute France, que vous pouvez applaudir d'ailleurs chaleureusement. Grâce à vous, aujourd'hui, plus que jamais, l'UNESCO est bien la maison de l'éducation, des sciences et de la culture. Et je vous demande d'accueillir très chaleureusement la directrice générale de l'UNESCO, Audrey Azoulay, et Dr Jane Goodall.
Dear Dr. Jane Goodall, distinguished guests, Chère Jane, you know now, and you've just witnessed, how much you are at home here at UNESCO. I had the immense honor and privilege to welcome you here 6 years ago for a screening of a documentary about your extraordinary career. And it is an immense honor to welcome you again today in Paris at UNESCO's headquarters for this lecture, A Speech for History. On this podium, you follow scientists such as the first Director General of UNESCO, Dr. Julian Huxley, co-founder of the World Wildlife Fund, or great anthropologists like Claude Lévi-Strauss or Margaret Mead. Like you, they built their message of peace on science of the highest caliber. We owe you a number of crucial discoveries about the great apes, their language, their emotions, their sociability, and above all, their material culture, for it was you who discovered their use of tools. These discoveries were made over the course of a long observation period on the banks of Lake Tanganyika, which later, in 2018, became a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. Your work has shattered the divide that humans have relentlessly built generation after generation between themselves and the rest of the living world. This makes the defense of great apes and more broadly all living things not just a means to our own survival, as we jointly advocated during the COVID-19 pandemic, but an end in and of itself. This is a defense you have led tirelessly. Chers invités, l'UNESCO est fière de mettre son mandat, les sciences, la culture, l'éducation, l'information, au service de la cause que défend le Dr Goodall, la redéfinition de notre relation à la planète, de son habitabilité. Et ici, malgré les crises, malgré les guerres, malgré les fractures du monde, nos 194 États membres travaillent ensemble à chercher ces consensus. Ce sont d'abord nos grands programmes scientifiques, autour de l'eau, autour des océans, autour de la place des femmes dans les sciences, des programmes scientifiques qui, ici, à l'UNESCO, incluent systématiquement les savoirs autochtones. C'est aussi le savoir à une information qui soit juste, alors que les journalistes qui traitent de l'environnement sont souvent menacés. 44 d'entre eux l'ont même payé de leur vie au cours des 15 dernières années. Et j'aurai le plaisir d'annoncer avec le président Lula au G20 dans un mois une initiative de l'UNESCO à ce sujet. Et puis ce sont surtout, et c'est ce qui nous lie si profondément au Dr Goodall, les zones protégées par l'UNESCO, les sites du patrimoine mondial naturel, mais surtout les réserves de biosphère, où se réinvente cette relation entre l'homme et la nature. Un programme qui est né dans les années 70, dont vous avez été la marraine lorsque nous avons fêté les 50 ans, le 50e anniversaire. Non seulement parce que votre zone première d'observation des chimpanzés est devenue une réserve de l'UNESCO, mais parce que plus généralement, ces zones protègent les habitats, associent les populations locales pour qu'elles puissent avoir des emplois durables, en lien avec les scientifiques, en mobilisant les savoirs ancestraux. Et c'est ainsi que la nature reprend de la force. Et c'est ainsi, par exemple, que les grands singes peuvent être respectés, qu'un équilibre peut être retrouvé. Et je pense au succès que nous avons connu, notamment pour la population de gorilles des montagnes, qui, dans ces zones, les populations ont repris une croissance après des années de danger critique. Mieux connaître, mieux protéger, mais aussi mieux éduquer, c'est le troisième pilier de l'action de l'UNESCO, mais je le sais aussi de l'Institut Jane Goodall, pour inclure dans les programmes scolaires une éducation sur les enjeux du climat, de la biodiversité, de notre relation à la nature et d'avoir une vision plus complète de nos impacts, des choix que nous faisons tous les jours. Et nous sommes très fiers de soutenir sur le terrain ces initiatives de l'Institut Jane Goodall qui ont des résultats tangibles et qui montrent qu'il y a de l'espoir, ce qui est aussi, je le sais, votre message. Dear Dr. Goodall, we need great figures like you, and you see how much your words are here expected, wanted, honored, and your presence is welcome. Because of your actions, because also of your message and your dedication, you help us overcome the shortcomings of our own capacity to understand the world. You embody the scientist, the adventurer, the activist, and it is my great honor and pleasure now to leave you the floor for this speech. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome once more Dr. Jane Goodall.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the most amazing welcome. And thank you, Secretary General Azole, for inviting me for this amazing occasion. And I'm very proud of the relationship that the Jane Goodall Institute has with UNESCO, which has gradually been building up to greater cooperation over the years. And it's so true. Today, the world is in such a state that no one organization can do it alone. We need to collaborate, we need to get together, we need countries and individuals to work together to make this a better world so that we can be a little bit proud of what we leave for our children. But first of all, because I'm absolutely sure that never before in this space has there been a proper acknowledgement that we humans are not the only beings on the planet. So I want to bring into this space the voice of the chimpanzee, the animal I've studied for so many years with my dedicated team. And what I'm going to say simply means this is me, this is Jane, because the chimpanzees have different ways of announcing their presence. So this is It's a distance call. It's very appropriate for you guys up in the balcony. So, to start with, the Jane Goodall Institute, let me just quickly explain, because some people don't understand what a global institute we have become since it began in 1977. There are 25 chapters of the Jane Goodall Institute around the world. There is a global Jane Goodall Institute which collates and makes sure that the different chapters are abiding by the mission of the Jane Goodall Institute. Our program for young people, Roots and Shoots, is in 74 countries and growing all the time. And finally, because I want to be sure that this complicated organization will continue and continue to grow after I'm gone, and I am 90, so I don't know how many more years left I have, but then there is a Jane Goodall Legacy Foundation so that we can build up an endowment. And there are a number of Jane Goodall representatives here today. There's, of course, a big JGI in France, and we have the chairman, Pierre, here somewhere down in the front. And we have representatives, yes, where are you? We have a number of executive directors, and I have to say, let's send a special wish to Galit, who's the executive director. She's just so sad that she can't be here because unfortunately she broke her foot yesterday and has to have surgery. So a special wish for her. Well, having said that, I want to pay, first of all, very special thanks to the person who's really enabled me to be who I am and to some extent enabled me to do what I've done. We can't choose, I don't think anyway, we can't choose where we're born, we can't choose who our parents are. But I got lucky. I got lucky in having the most extraordinary mother. I was born loving animals, all kinds of animals, and she was just so supportive. And to give you one example, when I was 4.5 years old, she took me for a holiday onto a farm in the country, a proper farm, not these terrible factory farms that we have today. And so I met for the first time cows and pigs out in the fields, and I was given a job to collect the hens' eggs. And the hens pecked around in the farmyard, but at night they slept in these little wooden hen houses to keep them safe from foxes. So my job was to go and collect the eggs. So I'd go around these little hen houses, and if there was an egg, I would put it in my basket. But I kept asking people, but where does the egg come out of the hen? Because I can't see a hole that big. And nobody told me. So one day, and I remember this really well, I saw a hen, she was brown, and she was going into one of these hen houses. And I must have thought, she's going to lay an egg. So I crawled after her. Big mistake, squawks of fear, she flew out. But now I'm on the path of discovery. I'm going to jolly well find out how this egg comes out. So I waited in an empty hen house, and I waited for 4 hours. For a child of 4, some of you are parents, that's a lot of patience. And so my mother was about to call the police. Nobody knew where I was. And then she sees this excited little girl rushing towards the house because I had seen how a hen lays an egg and where the egg comes out. And I don't know who was more excited, me or the hen. You know that. Anyway, so she sat down to hear this wonderful story of how a hen lays an egg. And I tell that story because isn't that the making of a little scientist? Curiosity, asking questions, not getting the right answer, deciding to find out for yourself, making a mistake, not giving up, and learning patience. It was all there, and a different kind of mother might have crushed that early scientific curiosity, and I might not have done what I've done. So she went on supporting me through my childhood. From the age of 5, World War II was raging. Television hadn't been invented back then. And so I was learning by being out in the garden. It was my grandmother's garden. We went there when war broke out. And you may be interested to know, since I'm in France, my father wanted me to grow up speaking French. So he rented a house in Le Touquet. And I was supposed to grow up learning French, but we'd only been there 3 months when war broke out. So we had to leave, and Mum, my sister, and I went to stay with my mother's mother in Bournemouth in England. So I don't speak French because in 3 months a child of 5 doesn't really learn a language. Sorry about that. So out in this big garden, I watched the squirrels and the birds and the insects. And because there was no television, it was books. And I loved books. Books came from the library. We had very little money. But I used to save up my pennies, pocket money, and spend Saturday afternoon crawling about in this little old second-hand bookshop. And on this occasion, I had just enough money to buy a very small second-hand book called Tarzan of the Apes. You know Tarzan from television and from movies, but I learned about Tarzan from the book. And of course, I fell passionately in love with this glorious Lord of the Jungle. And what did he do? He married the wrong Jane. Well, of course, I knew there wasn't a Tarzan, but that's when my dream began. I would grow up, go to Africa, live with wild animals, and write books about them. No thought of being a scientist. Girls didn't do that sort of thing. And everybody laughed at me. How will you do that? You don't have money. Back then, we thought of Africa as the dark continent, very dangerous place. And anyway, I was just a girl. But not my mother. And this was so important in my life that she said, if you really want to do this, you're going to have to work really hard and take advantage of every opportunity. And if you don't give up, hopefully you find a way. And because of that, I've been able to take this message around the world and talk to young people, particularly in disadvantaged communities. And so many of them have later said to me, thank you, Jane, you taught me because you did it, I can do it too. And many of them have decided to spend their life learning about animals and the natural world because of that. So there I am, 10 years old, growing up, no money for university, had to get a job, because I say we had little money. Got a job, well, first of all, did a secretarial course, which I didn't want to do. But again, my mother wisely said, if you're going to do it, give it everything you've got. You may not want to be a secretary, but be the best secretary you can. So I did work hard, and I got a wonderful job in London. But then came opportunity, a letter from a school friend inviting me for a holiday in Kenya, where her parents had bought a farm. And so I couldn't save up money in London. I went home. I worked as a waitress in a hotel around the corner. Really hard work. And it was my first experience of learning a new culture, because all the other waiters and waitresses were professional, and they came from Ireland. They were Irish Catholics. And so I learned that whole new culture, which is very different. Anyway, I finally saved up enough money, took about 5 months, and I had enough money for a return fare to Kenya. Well, in those days, of course, there were some planes, but they were very expensive. So I went by boat. It was a journey that took nearly a month because the Suez Canal was closed because of a war between Britain and Egypt. So the boat had to go all the way around Cape Town. And it was so exciting. Left England when it was grey and cold. The sea became bluer. I began to see flying fish. And then closer to the Cape, dolphins. And the first place where I set foot on African soil was Cape Town. And it was exciting. There were the Africans dressed in their national dress. I didn't know that this was just for tourists. And my mother had 2 friends there, and they had said, don't worry about Jane. When the boat stops to get new provisions, we'll look after her. So for 2 days, they took me around. And at first, it was so exciting. But then I began to notice signs on the backs of the seats and the doors to the hotels and the restaurants in Afrikaans. And I said, what do these words mean? White people only. I didn't grow up that way. My grandfather was a congregational minister. We judged people by who they were as human beings, not by anything else. So I became very uneasy. It was the height of apartheid in South Africa, and I was very glad to leave. Arriving in Kenya, it was different. Kenya was on the very brink of independence from British colonial rule. Stayed with my friend. Somebody said, if you're interested in animals, you should meet Dr. Louis Leakey, famous paleontologist, searching for the earliest humans in different parts of Africa. And I went to see him. He was head of the Natural History Museum in Nairobi. He took me all around. He asked me lots of questions. And because I had spent as long as I could in the Natural History Museum in London, and because I'd read every book I could about the animals of East Africa, I could answer a lot of his questions. Now, I talked about that boring secretarial job, training. Guess what? Just 2 days before I went to meet Leakey, his secretary had suddenly left. He needed the secretary, and there I was. And now I'm surrounded by people who can answer all my questions about the animals and plants of East Africa. And it wasn't like being a normal secretary. I was in the same room as him, and there were always interesting people coming in, and I was allowed to take my little bush baby, who slept in a gourd above Louis Leakey's desk. And when a visitor came, the bush baby's little face would poke out, and then he'd come out and suddenly leap onto this poor man's head. He didn't expect it, so it was quite funny to see the reaction. Leakey didn't mind at all. So there I was, and Leakey allowed me to go with his wife, one other young English girl, to what at that time was a 3-month visit every year to a very famous fossil site, Olduvai Gorge. Back then, nobody'd heard of it. It was the Leakeys who felt that the Oldovan pebbles were actually Stone Age tools. Nobody believed them. And in those days, some of you may have been to the Serengeti and marveled at the animals there. Back then, there was no road. There was no road from Arusha to Serenera. There was just a very rough track. There was not even a track to Olduvai Gorge. And how the Leakeys found their way there It's hard to tell in this great open plain. All the animals were there. There was just so many animals there. And we camped for 3 months. The only human beings we saw were 4 Maasai warriors. And Gillian and I were allowed to walk out in the evening after the hard day's work looking for fossils. And on this occasion, something made me look behind. And there, about the distance across this auditorium, was a young male lion. He was fully grown. His mane was beginning to grow. He was just standing, looking, his tail gently waving. I think he was just curious. Well, Gillian wanted to hide in the vegetation at the bottom of the gorge. And I said, Gillian, the lion will know where we are. We won't know where the lion is. We need to go up onto the plains, which is what we did. And I think it was that evening around the campfire that Leakey decided I was the person he'd been looking for to go and learn about the behavior of chimpanzees in the wild. Nobody had done that. And of course, I was really, really excited. Why did Leakey want me to go and do that? He was searching for the fossilized remains of the early humans. And from a fossil bone, you can tell a lot from where the muscles are attached, was the creature upright, from where on the teeth, the sort of food that was being eaten. But behavior does not fossilize. So Leakey, believing, as we now know to be true, that we and chimpanzees split apart from a common ancestor about 6 million years ago, maybe a little longer. And so he argued, if Jane sees behavior that's similar or the same in chimpanzees today and humans today, maybe that behavior was also in the common ancestor and they've taken it with them on their long, separate evolutionary pathways. That, he argued, would give him a way of better thinking about how early humans might have behaved. And of course, this is now generally accepted. And so we can think of early humans walking upright. We can think of them using tools before stone tools and things like that. But none of that was known back then. There were 2 problems. First of all, money. I hadn't been to college, remember, but finally a wealthy American said, all right, here's 6 months. We see how she does. Secondly, Tanzania was Tanganyika back then, was part of the crumbling British Empire. And the authorities said, a young girl in a forest on her own? Absolutely not. But Leakey never gave up. So in the end, they said, all right, but she can't come alone. So who volunteered to come? That same remarkable mother. She came for 4 months of my 6 months. After that, the authorities probably thought I was crazy, but seemed to be okay. But the great thing that she did during those 4 months that she was there, first of all, she boosted my morale. I was getting really depressed because as soon as the chimps saw me, they vanished into the undergrowth. They're very shy. And I only had money for 6 months. And after 4 months, there was still only one chimpanzee who was beginning to lose his fear of me. But my mother would say, but Jane, you're learning much more than you think. You found that peak, and with your binoculars, you see that chimpanzees sometimes travel alone, sometimes a mother with her children, sometimes a group of mothers, sometimes a group of males kind of hanging out together. And she said, you're learning how they make nests up in the trees at night. You're learning the kind of foods they eat and the kind of calls they make. So it was really sad that she left just 2 weeks before the breakthrough observation that everybody knows about now, that chimpanzees can use and make tools. And it was that first chimp who began to lose his fear, who I named a David Greybeard because he had the lovely white hair on his chin. And I saw him picking grass stems and using them to fish termites from their burrows and pulling the grass out and eating the insects off with his lips, and picking leafy twigs, and to use those as tools, he had to carefully strip the leaves and side branches. At that time, science believed humans, and only humans, could use and make tools. And so it was a very exciting observation, and it was that observation that enabled Leakey to get money for me to carry on when the 4 months ended. He got money from the National Geographic Society. So I could then relax. I knew that I had more time. I'd always known if I had time, I could gain the trust of the chimpanzees. And because of David, his calm presence, he was a born leader. He wasn't the top-ranking male, but he was gentle. And when the young ones were frightened, they would run to him for reassurance. And I suppose when I approached a group that was ready to run, if David was there, he just sat calmly. And I suppose they thought, well, she can't be so frightening after all. And gradually I was able to get closer. And gradually I was able to identify each one as an individual. And I got to know David's best friend, Goliath, the top-ranking male, and some of the other males like William and Mr. Wurzel. And I got to know the top-ranking female, old Flo and her family, and Passion and Melissa, and all the rest. And what was so striking was how like us they are. So in their gestures and postures of communication, they kiss, embrace, hold hands, pat one another, beg for food. And the mothers, the relationship with her family, strong bonds that can last through life, as we know today, because the research is still going on. It's in its 64th year. But back then, of course, I didn't know, but the bonds between mother and offspring were very obvious. Friendships between particularly two males will form very strong friendships and support each other in any dispute. And then you get two males competing for dominance, and they do compete for dominance, some of them. And they'll stand upright, and their hair will bristle, and they'll swagger, and they may raise a fist. Does that remind you of some human male politicians? I think so. And I didn't mention any names. Anyway, so it was a bit of a shock to find out that, like us, chimpanzees have their dark side. They can be violent, they can be brutal, they can kill. There are conflicts between neighboring communities. A community is about 50 individuals. And during those inter-community interactions where males will seemingly hunt individuals from the neighboring group, and if they come across one, male or female will attack them so brutally that they die of their wounds. And this shocked me, because I thought that chimps were like us, but nicer. And it's even more shocking to realize that because of this aggression, it made them seem even more like us. But at the same time, just as we have a compassionate, loving, and altruistic side to our nature, so too do they. And I was learning more and more about that as well. After about 2 years, I was told by Leakey that I had to go to get a degree, that there was no time for an undergraduate degree, that he got me a place in Cambridge University in England to do a PhD in animal behavior. So I was very nervous, and imagine how I felt when these learned professors told me I'd done everything wrong. Jane, you should have numbered the chimpanzees, your subjects, not given them names. You shouldn't talk about chimpanzees having personality. You shouldn't talk about them having minds capable of solving problems, and you absolutely cannot talk about them having emotions like happiness, sadness, fear, despair, and so on. Why? Those are unique to humans. And they told me, you cannot have empathy with your subjects. Scientists must be coldly objective. And of course, I had a wonderful teacher when I was a child who taught me that these professors were talking rubbish, that it wasn't true. And I bet many of you have had some kind of animal, a dog, a cat, a rabbit, whatever you've had, a bird. You know perfectly well, we are not the only beings on the planet with personalities, minds, and emotions. And it's perfectly possible to be objective and still have feelings for the being that you're studying. So anyway, I didn't confront them. I went on describing their behavior. And the Geographic sent a filmmaker, and his film was corroborating everything I'd said. So gradually, scientific attitude began to change. It's now called, I'm told, the Jane Goodall method of studying animals. Anyhow, I got my PhD, went back to Gombe. I went back to the best days of my life. I built up a little research station. Gombe is a tiny national park, so very few students. And I could spend hours not only learning about chimps in the forest, but learning about the forest ecosystem, this amazing mixture of animal and plant species, all interdependent and forming the forest ecosystem. When I'm out in these forests, I feel a very strong spiritual connection to the natural world. And so why did I leave? Why did I start traveling around the world, giving talks to people to raise awareness and also, of course, to raise money? But why did I leave Gombe? I could have stayed. I could still be there. But I went to a conference. I helped to start it. And that was in 1986, the middle of the 1980s. And it was by then there were 6 other scientists studying chimps in different parts of Africa. And so we wanted to know how much chimpanzee behavior changed or didn't change according to the environments they were in, whether there were different cultures. If you define culture as behavior passed from one generation to the next through observational learning. I had already talked that I guessed that that would happen, and lo and behold, it's true. There's different ways of tool using. Some foods are eaten in some area and not in others, and that's because the young ones learn by observing and imitating. And because the youngsters have a lot to learn, they have this very long childhood, 4 years between live births. And during those 4 years, the youngster is learning the cultures of his or her community. So at this conference, we also had a session on conservation, and it was shocking. I learned that right across Africa, wherever chimps were being studied, forests were being destroyed, they were losing their habitats, and their numbers were decreasing. So I went to that conference as a scientist. I left as an activist. People say it must have been a hard decision. It wasn't a decision, it was just something that happened to me. Chimps had given me so much. Now I must do what I could to help them. But I didn't know what to do. However, I got some money, again from National Geographic, and visited the study sites around Africa to learn more about the plight of the chimpanzees. And of course, there was the growing bushmeat trade, that's the commercial hunting of wild animals for food. Hunters were setting snares to catch antelopes, bush pigs, and so on. And a chimpanzee can get a hand or a foot caught in the wire snare. And although they can break the wire, they can't get the snare off, and so will either lose a hand or a foot or die of gangrene. And then in addition, of course, to habitat loss, mothers are shot so that babies can be stolen and trafficked around the world to be sold as pets or for some kind of entertainment, circuses and so on. And in addition, as the people moved further and further into the forest, they took with them human diseases. And chimpanzees are so like us, sharing 98.7% of our DNA, so they are able to catch our diseases, and this can have a devastating effect on a chimpanzee community. But at the same time as I was learning all this about the chimps, I was learning about the plight of some of the African people living in and around chimp habitat, the crippling poverty, the lack of good health and education facilities, and also the degradation of the farmland as their populations grew. And it came to a head when I flew over the tiny Gombe National Park. In 1960, when I began, it was part of the equatorial forest belt that stretched from western East Africa right across to the West African coast. But when I flew over in the mid-1980s, to my horror, I looked over a little island of forest that was the national park, and all around the trees were gone, the hills were bare. More people living there than the land can support. Too poor to buy food from elsewhere. Their own farmlands now infertile and overused. Why were they cutting down the trees? Because they were struggling to survive, and they had to try and get some money from charcoal or timber or clear land to grow more food to feed their families. And it hit me then, as I flew over that little Gombe, it hit me, if we can't find ways of helping these people make a living without destroying their environment, we can't save chimpanzees, forests, or anything else. And so back in 1990, we began a wonderful man, George Strundon, who'd worked out in that area of Tanzania already for 15 years. He helped me start a program which is known now as the Takari method, a very holistic program it is. But when we started, then it was a little group of 7 local Tanzanians who were chosen to help initiate this program. It was not a bunch of arrogant white people marching into a very poor African village and telling them what we were going to do to improve their lives. No, these 7 went into the 12 villages around Gombe and sat down and asked the people what JGI could do to help them. And that's where we began. Of course, they wanted more food, which meant restoring fertility to the overused land without agricultural chemicals, by the way. And they wanted better facilities for health and education, particularly for their children. And we worked with the local Tanzanian authorities to improve these. As they came to trust us, we introduced other programs, like water management programs, like finding as many scholarships as we could to give girls a chance of secondary education, because back then it was only the boys who were eligible for that. And then we introduced microfinance, and that was because my great friend Muhammad Yunus, for whom I'm so happy that finally he's now been freed from all these accusations of dishonesty, which I'm sure some of you must have read about. But anyway, he took me to Bangladesh, where he started the Grameen Bank. And I met women who, until he began this program of giving very, very small loans, which the banks wouldn't give, the normal banks. And I met these women, and they told me what it was like when they first had money in their own hands. And so we introduced this microfinance into the villages around Gombe, particularly for women Because unfortunately, although the men can get loans, they tend to drink the profit and then they can't pay back. But the women, of course, are much more eager to save it, to feed their families and so on. So it's made a very, very big difference to the living conditions of people living around Gombe. And when I've talked to some of the people, and we have filmed some of the people, they feel if they take out a loan to start a small environmentally sustainable business and they pay it back, then they're proud. It's theirs. They've done it themselves. That gives them the pride that's so important when you want to move forward in your life. And then if they wish, they can take out a larger loan. But when they tell me about the difference it's made, it really warms your heart. So also some tree planting as we moved into the villages out beyond Gombe. And so what began with these 12 villages then spread into 104 villages covering most of the range of chimpanzees in Tanzania. And so as this program began to show real good results, and as the people's attitude to life and to us began to change, then we were able to bring in our conservation science program, thanks to Dr. Lillian Pintea and some of the local people at Gombe, introducing more modern technology, GIS, GPS, satellite imagery. And this meant that the local people could develop their land use management plans required by the government. It also meant that we could keep much better track of chimpanzee movements, and gradually other technologies were introduced. Today we use drones and camera traps and things of that sort. So this program has turned out to be really successful, and this Takari method is now in 6 other African countries where various Jane Goodall Institute programs are working to study chimpanzees. By this time, I'm beginning to travel around the world, raising awareness about the problems faced by chimps and people in Africa, and also, of course, raising money. Because the Takari program and carrying on the research at Gombe was obviously costing money. So as I was traveling around, back in the 90s, I was already meeting young people who were losing hope, way back then. And how shocking. Young people losing hope in high school and university. And 12 high school students came to see me in Dar es Salaam. They had different concerns. They were worried about what was happening in their world. Some of them were worried about the poaching in the national parks. Why wasn't the government doing more about it? They were worried about illegal dynamite fishing. They were worried, some of them, about the street children sniffing glue with no homes. Some were worried about the cruel treatment of stray dogs. And so they wanted me to fix those problems. And I said, I love Tanzania, but I'm not a Tanzanian. They went off to their 8 different schools. They gathered up other friends who felt the same as they did. We had a meeting of about 30 young people in 1991, and then the Jane Goodall Institute's youth program began. We called it Roots and Shoots, and that's based on, think of a big tree. I love trees. You think of a very big tree, it probably began from a little seed, and when it began to grow, you could pick it up and there'd be these little tiny roots and a little tiny shoot, and it would seem so weak and so insignificant. But it's what I call a magic. There's a magic, a life force so strong those little roots, to reach the water, can work through rocks and eventually push them aside. And that little shoot, to reach the sunlight, can work through a brick wall and eventually knock it down. You've all seen things like that. So we see the young people, the roots and shoots, are working through the problems that we face today and knocking them aside like the rocks and breaking them down like the walls. And we decided on that first meeting, the main message of Roots and Shoots would be every single individual matters, every single individual makes a difference every single day. Don't forget, you are important because you make a difference. And when millions of people make the right decisions, this makes a huge impact around the world. People come to me when they're depressed, many people, and they think about the problems of the world and they feel depressed. We all do when we think about the problems facing us today. But I say to them, you can't solve those problems, but what about where you live? Is there something you care about? Maybe you care about plastic litter. Maybe you care about pollution coming from agriculture or household waste. There's something. Well, get some friends together and try and do something about it. And they do, and they find it does make a difference. It makes them feel better, and then they want to do more. So with Roots and Shoots, because everything's interconnected, we decided that each group would choose between them 3 projects, one to help people, one to help other animals, and one to help the environment. And they don't all have to do every one of those projects, but they must share them so that they understand this interconnectedness between the different projects. So what began with 12 high school students is now in 74 countries around the world. We have members from kindergarten through university, and I'm telling you that they are making a difference. There is a growing group of Roots and Shoots across France. I just spoke to many of them. So much enthusiasm, so many great ideas that the young people have when they understand the problems, and we empower them and perhaps help them to make a difference. And this is so important when you think, what are we leaving behind for our children today? We're leaving a flawed world. And this is where I come to the biggest difference between humans and other animals. We know today that animals are way more intelligent than we used to think. Not just the great apes, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, monkeys, whales, elephants, but we now know that pigs are very intelligent. Some of them are more intelligent than some dogs. And if you don't believe me, Google not Picasso the artist, but Piccasso, and you will see what I mean. Picasso's paintings are selling for about $5,000, and her biggest painting sold for $25,000. And she loves to do it. The person who rescued her from a factory farm is an artist, and she noticed this pig watching her. So she set up an easel, gave the pig a paintbrush with paint on it, and the pig started to paint. You'll love to watch it. And we now know birds are very intelligent, crows particularly, and of course parrots. I know a parrot who knows 1,500 words, and a word is only counted in his vocabulary if he said it twice unprompted in the right context. And then it surely will surprise you to know you can teach goldfish. And there's a Chinese man, and he's got 3 goldfish on this side of the tank and 3 on the other side, and he's taught them to play football. Seriously. These ones try and get the ball in the goal over there, and these ones try to take it away and put it in the goal over there. Goldfish. Bumblebees can be taught to drop a little marble into a hole, and then they get a nectar reward. That's amazing. Other bumblebees who have not been trained can do the same just by watching the trained bumblebees. And then some of you must have seen My Octopus Teacher, and we know the amazing intelligence of the octopus. So, yes, they're very intelligent, but think what we've done. We've sent a rocket up to Mars, little camera. We now know what the surface of Mars looks like. We've got the internet. And these are feats that no animal, however intelligent, could do. But we're not intelligent, are we? We've got this amazing intellect. But if we were intelligent, Homo sapiens, the wise creature, but we're not intelligent, because an intelligent creature would not be destroying its planet. It's our only home. And what have we done to it? If you think of the problems that we've created, we've got the warming globe, we've got loss of species, loss of biodiversity around the world, we've got pollution of air, water, and land, we've got industrial agriculture poisoning the soil with chemical pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. We're polluting the water of the ocean with the runoff from agriculture, from industry, and from household waste. We've got the terrible problem of plastic. All of us have plastic in our bodies. Plastic is everywhere. And we've got the problem of poverty, because living in poverty, people may destroy the environment to survive, as around Gombe. And if you're in an urban area, you're going to buy the cheapest junk food, which is probably being very harmful to the environment, just because you can't afford to buy the rest. On the other hand, we've got to do something to curtail unsustainable lifestyles. Some people have so much more than they need. And I feel this very much from growing up in World War II, when everything was rationed, when you didn't take any mouthful for granted. And that was a big benefit for me, because I don't live unsustainably, at least I try not to. I do fly when I'm traveling 300 days a year, because nobody yet has given me a magic carpet. But right now, I see, people are asking me, Jane, do you really have hope? And I know the problems that the world faces, but I do have hope. I see our human beings, we're as though at the mouth of a very long, very dark tunnel, and right at the end there's a little star, and that's hope. But it's no good sitting at the mouth of the tunnel and waiting for that star to come. No, we have to roll up our sleeves. We have to climb over, crawl around, crawl under all the problems that I've mentioned that lie between us and the star. And the good news, there are groups of people tackling each one of these problems that I've mentioned and those that I haven't. But the sad thing is they're so often working in their own narrow little tunnel, in their own silo. And they may solve one problem, but they're not thinking holistically. And solving one problem may lead to another. And to give a very simple example, your group has managed to close down a coal mine. Yay! All that CO2 is no longer going up into the environment. But what about the people who've lost their jobs, falling into poverty, buying cheap, junky food, or even struggling worse to survive? There are groups of people training those whose industry has shut down into other ways of making a living. So if we'd thought holistically in the beginning, we'd work together. That's the answer for the future. No organization can do it alone. We need more collaboration, we need more partnerships, we need to think more holistically. And that's something I was talking to Audrey about earlier today. We need to collaborate to make the world a better place. And my reasons for hope, first of all, the young people, and I've talked about that, and it really is true that around the world they're making a huge, huge difference. And it's growing all the time. Secondly, there's the resilience of nature. If we give nature a chance, it will come back and again make beautiful places we've totally destroyed. If you fly over Gombe today, no more bare hills. The trees have come or are coming back, and with them the various animals, birds, insects, and so on. And animals on the very brink of extinction can be given another chance. I wrote a whole book about it, and it's still happening today. And then there's the human intellect. We are beginning to come to our senses and try to find ways of living in greater harmony with nature. Science coming up with renewable energy and so on. And we are beginning to think about our own environmental footsteps every day. What do we buy? Did it harm the environment? Was it cruel to animals? Is it cheap because of unfair wages? Then let's try and buy something more ethically produced. Will it cost a bit more? Almost certainly. But if it costs a bit more, you value it more and you waste less. Like I grew up in the war, we never wasted anything. And there are communities around the world that never waste anything. It's just in the affluent communities around the world that you see this terrible waste and these truly unsustainable lifestyles. So we're beginning to start thinking about that. And then there's what I call the indomitable human spirit, the people who tackle what seems impossible and won't give up, and so often succeed. There are people with terrific physical disabilities, and my goodness, do they inspire those around them? There's a man in Canada, and he was born with no arms and no legs. He has a little thing, I suppose, some kind of, I don't know, foot coming out of his thigh, and he's got tiny stumps of arms, and they're as thick as my wrist. He goes around the world on a skateboard. He hops up onto the sofa beside you, and you're looking into his face, and it's perhaps one of the most alive, intelligent faces I've ever looked into. That is the kind of indomitable spirit that surely will enable us to overcome the problems we face today. The last reason for hope is, I don't know if it's a reason for hope. You can think about it. But one of the worst things that we're facing today is war. Not just the two big wars, Ukraine and Russia, and Gaza and Israel, but conflicts around Africa, growing unrest around the world. And it's this dark side of chimpanzees which also we share with them. I lived through World War II, and there was a time when it was inevitable that we would be defeated by the Germans. All of Europe had been defeated or capitulated. Germany had a mighty air force, army, and navy. Britain was not prepared for war, not at all. We had just a little bit of barbed wire around the coast. But we had Winston Churchill, a flawed man, but the perfect leader for times of war, because he roused the British spirit. And he made this famous speech where he said, "We will never be defeated. We will defeat them on the beaches, in the roads, in the lanes, in the woods." And he turned aside to a friend and said, "We'll fight them with the ends of broken bottles because that's all we've got." So he managed to bring in the United States, and we won the war. So there is hope for people living in war. There is hope because our young people, roots and shoots, we try to bring them together from different parts of the world. And as they get together as young people, these differences between nations fade away. And we find that coming from countries at war, the young people become friends. And the young people are realizing they're much more important than the color of your skin or your language or your culture or maybe even your religion. is the fact we're all human beings. We all laugh, we all cry, we all love. What we have to suppress, and what I hope the young people are helping us to do, we have to fight the fact we can all hate. So those are my reasons for hope. And I think it's very uplifting for me. I want to end with one story. And it's a story about how we need peace and harmony, not only with each other, but also with the natural world and animals. And it's a story about a chimpanzee, a big male, and he'd grown up alone. He didn't know anything about other chimpanzees, and he was introduced to a group. And he was attacked, and he was so terrified, he managed to get over the railing, which would protect him from falling into the deep water of the moat. And he started to drown because chimpanzees can't swim. And one of the visitors, jumped in, and he managed to grab this large male chimp, and he pushed him up onto the bank of the enclosure, and then turned to go back to his very worried family. But then the chimp started slipping down into the water again. And by this time, 3 of the other big males were approaching with their hair bristling, and male chimps are much stronger than us. And this man stood very still. He looked at his family, and then he looked at this chimp who's just falling into the water again, and he went back, and he pushed the chimp up until he was safely grabbing onto some grass. That evening, he was asked, "What made you do such a brave thing?" And he said, "Well, I looked into his eyes, and it was like looking into the eyes of a man." And the message was, "Won't anybody help me?" That's what the world is saying to us today. So let us get together, each do our bit in whatever way we can. Make the world better for the children who are coming after us, and help them to make the world better for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I told you before, Dr. Jane Goodall, we know at UNESCO to make great welcome. Thank you so much. You said depressed people come to see you, and look what you've done. It's remarkable. You brought over 1,300 people in a temple of concrete on the first day of vacation for an anti-depression therapy session. It's incredible. Thank you so much. Nous allons passer maintenant à un petit moment de questions-réponses. Et je vais inviter Cyril Dion à me rejoindre sur scène. Quelques petites précisions. Si vous pouvez baisser un petit peu le son de vos appareils. Il y a certains appareils qui sont réglés très très fort, et du coup on les entend, justement, c'est l'intérêt du béton, on les entend très fort à travers toute la salle. Donc pendant la deuxième partie de la session, veillez bien à ce que le volume de votre appareil, de votre écouteur, ne soit pas trop fort. Il va y avoir des micros qui vont passer dans la salle, on va vous donner la parole très vite. Et d'abord, Cyril, la scène de l'UNESCO est la tienne. Bonne continuation.
Bonjour tout le monde, ça va? Tout le monde va bien? Bon. I'm speaking to them in French and I'm speaking to you in English. Is that all right? Because they're French, they don't understand English. No, that's not true, but I know it's not your favorite place to be, and I know maybe you would have liked to be with your dog in the countryside and have a long walk, so sorry for that. Sorry for, being
like
with us.
Like we did. You and I have walked in the forest together.
Exactly, like we did. I once told you that when I was sitting next to you, I felt like I've been, meditating for 3 hours on the top of a mountain. And that's the effect you're doing to people. So I guess maybe changing the world is trying to be a wonderful and true, powerful human being. So thank you for being a true and powerful human being. Thank you.
Thank my mother.
I heard you say many times that your mission on Earth is to give hope to people. And I guess every one of us is trying to find a meaning to his life and a purpose. So, do you think that we, human beings, have a purpose? That our species has a purpose?
I think individual people have a purpose. I'm not sure about humanity as a whole, what purpose it could have. But, it started off as just part of the natural world, just another creature, and look what's happened to us. We're just taking everything over. And then when somebody gets hurt by, say, a wolf, well, that's because we've killed all the wolf's prey, and they take one of our cows, and we blame them and think they're horrible. But think what we've done to them.
But do you think, even though we don't have a purpose as a species, because we're like a species among many others, what kind of purpose should we give to
each person? Okay.
What kind of purpose humanity should seek right now?
Well, the purpose right now should be to make the world better in any way we can. Our purpose should be to think about how we behave, to think, like I say, about what we buy and how it was made, to think about the fact that animals are thinking, feeling beings like us and how we treat them, to think about our own little footstep each day, so when we go to bed, we can say to ourselves, well, I left the world just a little bit better, or at least I didn't harm it. But so many people, if they thought about it when they went to bed, would be horrified. But they don't seem to think about it.
But I don't want to sound gloomy, but the thing is, it's not really working so far. I've been an activist for the last 20 years. You've been an activist for like the last 50 or 60 years. And we kind of have the feeling that we're losing the battle right now. Climate change is worse and worse. Scientists are just afraid of the 6th mass extinction, happening maybe in the next century. So, what is the next step? Why aren't we winning? We activists, all the people who are trying to change the world right now.
Well, I think one reason we're not winning is that we've got some pretty nasty people up in high positions in government. There's no question about that. And when you take a country which is full of people just like us, people who want a decent life, people who want to live in peace. I mean, think of the women in Afghanistan, for example. Think of people in small communities who are being persecuted in the countries where they live. There's so much, I'm almost going to say evil in power in some countries. But if you take the ordinary average person, give the child a good beginning, give the child a beginning where he's not taught to hate another. I mean, I know that Israelis at one time were taught to talk about the Palestinians as cockroaches, and the Palestinians were told to talk about the Israelis. I can't remember what nasty thing.
Pigs.
And you're bound to have a child growing up not in the way that we would like. But, you know, how do you change it? If every child had a decent upbringing like you and I did, we wouldn't have the problems in the world today. But the main thing is we mustn't give up. We've got a window of time. There is time to start slowing down climate change and restoring some of biodiversity. Roots and Shoots between them are planting thousands and thousands, millions of trees everywhere. We are beginning to create corridors linking up patches of preserved environment, and corridors are so important. And there are some, you know, cross-boundary programs in different countries, so that if the media would talk about the good things going on, that would encourage people and give them hope. They could say, well, they did it, I can do it too. But it's all doom and gloom, and they don't share these wonderful stories of amazing people.
But in some way you're saying that we would maybe need to get rid of these male politicians you were mentioning before, or these nasty people who are sometimes in charge of huge companies who want to make profit?
Well, we can't, can we? I mean, the only hope is, we started Roots and Shoots in 91, so already we've got some members who went through then. They hang on to their values, respect and compassion. And so they're going to replace, I don't know if we have time, but they will replace, the leaders will become better. That's why the last years of my life I'm fighting to grow Roots and Shoots further and further and further, because they are the future.
Ça y est, j'ai posé toutes mes questions. Alors, je vais vous proposer maintenant qu'on rentre dans une conversation entre Jane et vous. Si vous avez une question, essayez de la faire brève. Si vous avez une conférence à faire, en gros, la faites pas cet après-midi. Ce serait gentil. Pour qu'on puisse donner la parole à un maximum de personnes. Qui est-ce qui voudrait commencer? Ok, au premier rang là-bas.
My name is Jochen Wermuth from Berlin. Thank you very much for the wonderful, inspiring speech. My greatest hope is an idea, it turns out by Al Gore from '93. It's called the Climate Carbon Tax and Dividend, where you charge for a ton of CO2 the 200 euros of externality it causes, and you distribute it evenly to all the people. So any person would receive every month 200 euros. It is socially just, it's market-based, and it turns out the United Arab Emirates is considering to introduce it because it would drive out coal and expensive oil and gas. Maybe the EU could introduce it, maybe US could introduce this, and that could be a fast path for the market-driven solutions of our problem. The basic idea is we should cause for the damages, you should pay for it, and it should be socially just. What do you think we could do to make this carbon tax and dividend happen? Thank you.
Well, carbon credits, carbon tax, the way Costa Rica did it, they persuaded the city to pay a little bit of extra money for clean water, clean air, that could then be paid to the farmers to save the forest trees rather than cut them down to get money. So people living in poverty, you know, it's really important they get some some money to protect the environment. That's why carefully controlled tourism is a good thing, because it brings revenue in so that people don't have to shoot all the animals. They can save them to bring money in to the government and to the local people. But carbon credits right now, I think, are very useful to start the ball rolling. But in the long run, it just encourages those using fossil fuel to go on. They can use it, but they'll pay something. It's kind of a greenwashing thing. We have used it in Gombe. We've used the Red Plus program, but we're moving away from it through microfinance and tourism.
Before we take another question, there is a huge question actually facing environmental issues. Is that the fact that we're not talking that much about paying attention to the living world. We're talking about decarbonized society a lot, climate change, but we can decarbonize. I mean, get rid of fossil fuel and still destroy the natural world by digging big mines and so on. So do you try to alert politicians about that? About the fact that we cannot only focus on climate change and we need to see what kind of consequences the fight against climate change could have on the natural world?
I don't think there's any use fighting climate change if that's all we fight, because it's all interrelated. And you've got to consider climate change is absolutely intertwined with loss of biodiversity. And so, but that's the only advantage of the number of people on the planet. We've got enough people getting more and more educated to tackle all these different problems with their different skill sets. And, they really are. You can't take one and just solve that. But as I say in my tunnel, there are enough people to tackle them all, but they must talk to each other and work together.
Qu'est-ce qu'il y a une autre question? Alors, il y en a pas mal par là-bas, donc on va commencer par... allez, la personne en vert, là-bas.
It's awfully hard to pick.
Jane, once again, you fascinated me. Actually, we met each other 40 years ago. This was just 1 year before you started traveling the world. And today, to be here, I see that you've not changed. Actually, you're so consistent to your words. Thank you so much. And I came here with my students from Audencia who just entered the Roots and Shoots program. And they are just about to actually enter the professional world, companies. Which recommendations can you give them to be exemplary, to do good to the companies and also to the world?
Yeah, well, it's kind of rather a broad question because it depends on the company. And I think gradually some of the big corporations are beginning to change. There's an awful lot of greenwashing, but they are beginning to act in a more sustainable way, or trying to. And so, one quick story. I met a CEO of a big international company, and he told me, he said, Jane, for 8 years I've really been trying to get my company more sustainable in the country where we source our goods, in the supply chain as much as possible, in our offices around the world, the way we interact, and also the way we treat our customers. 3 reasons. 1, seeing the writing on the wall, seeing that people are realizing that natural resources are being used up too fast, and therefore the resources are being used up too fast, and therefore we better, start doing things differently. We can't go on taking. And secondly, consumer pressure. People are beginning to say, I'm not going to buy that because it hurt the environment, cruel to animals, unfair wages. But he said what tipped the balance for me was my little girl. She came back from school one day and she said, "Daddy, they tell me that what you're doing is hurting the planet. That isn't true, is it, Daddy? Because it's my planet."
Alors, relevez vos mains. Là-bas, la personne en blanc. Voilà.
Moi, j'adore les singes, mais est-ce que quand vous étiez petite, vous aimez déjà les singes?
She said, "I love monkeys, but did you already love the monkeys when you were a child?"
No, I didn't really know anything about monkeys growing up in wartime England. Yes, I was given a toy chimpanzee by my father when I was 1.5, and I loved him, but I didn't really relate him to the wild. No, my favorite animal is absolutely not a chimpanzee. They're much too like people to be a favorite animal. In fact, I actually think of them as beings, like us, some nice, some nasty. No, my favorite animal, without any question, is a dog.
C'est pour ça que je disais que tout à l'heure, Jane aurait préféré être avec son chien plutôt qu'être au milieu de Paris, dans un blocos, même si c'est très beau et que c'est l'UNESCO. Alors, la personne qui est là-bas au fond, qui lève très fort sa main, avec beaucoup d'enthousiasme. Ah bah elle s'est fait piquer le micro.
Merci. First, congratulations. Second, a short question. I'm interested in animal psychiatry. And my question is, did you observe in nature chimpanzees with mental disorder as autism, schizophrenia, paranoia, or bipolar trouble? Thank you.
Did you observe chimpanzees who are mentally ill, like who would have like autism or schizophrenia or this kind of disease? Chimpanzees. Did you observe chimpanzees who have those diseases? Who are mentally ill?
Well, not really. There was one chimpanzee, orangutan, I think, in captivity, who was diagnosed with Down's disease. But in the wild, I think chimpanzees with severe mental disease probably wouldn't survive infancy. So.
Alors, l'autre personne qui était sur le même rang, ouais, allez.
Hello, Jane. Over here, I am Paula from Panama, and you've spoken about hope. And you've been blessed with patience from a little age to hide 4 hours to see chickens. But how can you tell people to have more continuity? Because sometimes it's easy to be hopeful at some point, but to maintain it and keep the action going is where usually people lose strength. What would you suggest? Thank you.
So how to give them hope when?
She said it's easy to have hope, like at a precise moment, but how can you keep on having hope on the long term and to be determined?
Yeah, well, I am 90. How do I? And I try to say that, I keep on having hope, because if we lose hope, we become apathetic. We do nothing. And apathy will be the doom of us. And if you don't have hope and you become depressed and then you do nothing. So encouraging people to have hope. And yes, it'll go up and down. And sometimes it's very hard to feel hopeful. And the worst for me, as I've said, is these wars. But, we've got all these children we're bringing into the world. And even, let's just say that it's no good, that the world is going to be destroyed. Wouldn't you rather live believing that what you're doing at least is making life better for everybody around you and yourself than just giving up and falling into apathy and doing nothing. So I keep up my hope because I'm an obstinate kind of person. I'm pig-headed, and I'm not going to give up. And I will believe perhaps there will be a miracle. We can't tell, can we? And, you know, with all these young people growing up to be active, passionate citizens, it's a huge reason for hope. And all these projects that are so incredible, this big corridor across Europe, what's it called? Where they're rewilding it. And it involves how many countries? 4 or 5 or something. You know, there's so much good going on. Put it together. Let the media give stories of doom and gloom, yes, but let them also report more on the amazing things that are happening. Because the more people who have hope and the more people who fight for that hope because they believe that they can make a difference, then the world is going to be a better place. I've been talking all day.
Alors, j'ai pas fait le milieu pour l'instant. Ah oui, en haut, bah oui, vous êtes plein. Bah qu'est-ce que vous faites là? Alors, alors bah évidemment, mais je suis myope aussi, alors vous faites pas d'efforts non plus. Là, il y a un petit garçon, je crois, avec une écharpe tricolore, qui est derrière un pupitre. D'ailleurs, cette scène est un peu bizarre, hein, mais...
Bonjour, j'ai une question. Je suis au conseil municipal des jeunes du Vésinet. Comment vous avez réussi à savoir l'émotion des gorilles et des chimpanzés?
Well, can you tell when somebody is happy? They're smiling, they look happy. A little baby chimp, a young infant chimp, when they're happy, they'll turn somersaults and they'll twiddle round and round. They'll play together and laugh. Just like us. There really isn't any difference. When they're depressed, they'll just sit, they just don't interact with others. We have had one young one die of grief. His mother died, and he just refused to eat, and he curled up, and he looked huddled, and he rocked like this. He was clearly depressed. You can certainly tell when they're angry. They bristle their hair and they make their lips into a furious face. You certainly know when they're frightened.
Easy. How many more questions?
There's many.
Okay, as many. Allez, là-haut.
Bonjour, je suis Juliette, je suis enseignante à l'IAE de Saint-Étienne, c'est une école de management de l'université. Je suis maman d'un petit garçon de 9 ans. Ma question repose sur nos enfants qui représentent les nouvelles générations et le conseil que vous pourriez donner à notre gouvernement, à notre ministère, sur ce qu'on devrait faire au niveau de la petite enfance, de l'enfance, pour les éduquer au vivant. Est-ce que, selon vous, il faudrait imposer des programmes à l'école? Est-ce qu'il faudrait faire plus? J'aimerais vraiment avoir votre avis sur ce sujet.
Well, from what I gather, do we need to teach about the environment at school? That was it? I mean, one of the things in our Roots and Shoots program, encouraging young people to be out in nature, one of the big problems is that the young people today on their cell phones, their iTablets, I've seen a child of 3 years old being pushed along in a pram in the most beautiful place. There was trees with flowers overhead, and it was staggeringly beautiful. And this child was just on his iTablet doing something, and the mother was on her cell phone. And the thing is that it's now been scientifically proved that for a small child, time in nature is beneficial for their psychological development. And in Canada and Japan, Adults can be prescribed, they can have a doctor's prescription, time in nature, so many hours a week, because it's beneficial for psychological and physical health. So this is one of the big problems, this disconnection from the natural world. Understanding that or not understanding that we're part of the natural world and we depend on it, but what we depend on is healthy ecosystems. And an ecosystem is that complex, interrelated mix of animals and plants, each one with a role to play. And I see it as like a beautiful tapestry. And when an animal or a plant disappears from that particular ecosystem, imagine a thread is pulled from the tapestry. And if enough threads are pulled, then the tapestry will hang in tatters and the ecosystem will collapse. And that is happening. So, time in nature, we must protect nature for the future. And then you get this, and it is a big problem. We've got to improve the lives of people. At the same time, we've got to protect nature on which we depend. And it's not an easy problem. And I'm sorry for the people who have to tackle it. But it really is a problem, because if we don't save the natural world, then all these people we bring out of poverty, they won't have a future, because we need the natural world. And you know, there's 8 billion of us on the planet now, said to be 10 billion in 2050. We're already using up natural resources too fast, making too heavy a demand. So what's going to happen? And I should say that our Takari program, we do offer family planning delivered by the local people, and it's incredibly well received. The women are so grateful. And we even had men come and ask for a vasectomy because they say, we cannot afford to have more children.
You once told me that we protect what we love and we love what we know. So if people and children don't know the natural anymore, they don't want to protect it. And we have an American study showing that American children between 4 and 10 years old know how to recognize like 1,000 brands and logos in a second, and less than 10 plants who are growing around their home. So that's a problem. I mean, if at school we don't allow the children to go into nature, and there is wonderful experiences showing the benefit of it, like forest school, for example, in the UK, in Denmark, in Germany, and in France, in some part of France, they will never have the feeling of urgency that we need to protect that beauty.
Yeah, they don't know it. You know, one good thing, though, we are beginning to listen to the voices of the indigenous people, those who've been guardians of the natural world for sometimes thousands of years. And they're beginning to appear in big international meetings, and films are being made about them. And, you know, it's so important.
Alors, revenons un peu en bas. Au milieu, juste devant moi, avec une capuche et des lunettes. Je crois qu'il y a une capuche. Non, c'est pas sûr, c'est peut-être mes yeux. Au milieu, là. Non, c'était des cheveux. Désolé pour la capuche.
Est-ce que vous pensez qu'on devrait mettre plus d'animaux, d'animaux et de nature dans l'art, les films, la musique, les livres, pour changer les états d'esprit?
Nice one. Did you get it?
I didn't get the beginning.
Do you think we would need to have more animals in literature, movies, to change people's mindset?
More animals?
To show more animals, nature, to put the natural world more into the stories that we tell in movies, in novels, in paintings.
Yes, well, I think, you know, Roots and Shoots isn't only about, Roots and Shoots is very much about art, dance, music, singing, having fun. Having fun is tremendously important, and so we need children to understand animals. In the inner city, sometimes you have to take nature into the children, and there are programs where animals are being rescued and children can go and see them. They can't be released into the wild. Having a dog, or for some people a cat, can change their lives totally. I mean, hundreds of people have told me, this dog made all the difference. I was depressed, and now, I wanted to kill myself. So, yeah, we need animals, we need teaching about animals, we need nature to bring to us if we can't go to nature. I'm not sure if that was the question.
Not really, but it was a nice answer. So art to you is a way to show that we need to have a closer relationship to nature also.
Definitely need a closer relationship with nature, one way or the other.
Alors,
There's one here. This one's been...
Là-haut. Alors, de ce côté-là, on n'a pas eu encore. Là-haut, là-haut, là-haut. Ah, encore le conseil municipal du Vésinet. Bon, les gars, vous êtes 5 de Blue One. Ah, c'est d'autres. Bon, allez. Là-haut, le pupitre. Allez-y.
Bonjour, je suis conseiller municipal de la ville de Lons-Saunier, une petite ville du Jura. Je voulais vous poser la question, qu'est-ce qui a fait que vous passiez d'une passion, votre passion pour les animaux, à un combat politique? Et aussi, est-ce que vous êtes végétarienne?
I did not move from my passion for animals. If I want to save animals, I need to interact with politicians and big business. Otherwise, you can't save the planet. I was a vegetarian for many years. When I learned about the treatment of dairy cows and laying hens and the horrible cruelty, I became a vegan. Yeah, let me say one more thing. And France needs to pull up his socks in that way. We spent a long time yesterday trying to get vegan butter and we failed.
Alors, pardon? Encore plus? Une seule?
Look, you've got
Très bien.
to get this man.
Okay, this man over there.
He's been right from the beginning.
My name is Max. Thank you so much for the inspiring speech, Jane. We're in Paris, the capital of France. Next year will have been 10 years since the world adopted the treaty, Paris Agreement. How realistic do you think it is for humanity, for mankind, to stay within the limits of global warming 1.5 degrees Celsius? I'm not expecting a simplistic answer, obviously, but what will be your intake on this? And what does humanity have to do if we are to abide by this goal? Thank you.
Well, I'm not the one to say whether or not we can reach the goal. But all I can do is say the things we need to do. And that is to stop using oil and gas, to stop relying on eating cows for food because they produce so much methane, to refuse to buy food that's made from industrial agriculture, which right now means most people would starve because there isn't yet enough permaculture and things like that. So, you sometimes have to buy food that's been made. But there is a move today to move back to small family farms. That's happening all around the world. And, that's what we should try to encourage, that kind of thing. There's things beyond our control, like as the permafrost melts, you get methane gas pouring into the environment. I don't know that we can do much about that. Can you think of any other things that we should be doing? I mean, thinking about, not wasting electricity and trying to go to renewable energy, but your batteries are using lithium and countries are being dug up to get the lithium. And I met somebody the other day and they said, we are working on an alternative to lithium.
Yeah. No, in a general way, we need to reduce our consumption of material and energy in every field, but we also need to get organized, as we were talking about before, to change the people who are in power, because that's also one of the main problems we have. I mean, we have people who don't want the change to happen. I mean, we know, for example, that many fossil fuel companies have spent billions of dollars in the past decades to create a doubt about the reality of climate change and to prevent the states to take action. So we also need to organize ourselves and to be millions to replace those people and to replace them in the companies and in the governments, to have massive decisions who are going to give a new direction to people, because most of the things we're doing in our day-to-day life are influenced by the laws, by the things that we find in the supermarkets, by the way the city are organized. So we also need those things to change.
Yeah, we one of the things, I think I already said it, that our Roots and Shoots groups are planting millions of trees. And there's the Trillion Tree Project that big corporations are deciding that they will join in. There's a problem in that in so many cases, the wrong species of tree is being planted. It's no good just sticking it in the ground and then leaving it, because it may die. So you have to take care of it. You have to plant it at the right time, and you have to make sure you get the right species. But just remember this, we now know that trees can communicate. They communicate with this wonderful layer of microfungi under the ground, or they put pheromones into the air, so that when a species of a caterpillar plague is coming, they put out signals, and other trees of the same species will then put poison up into their leaves to protect themselves against this invasion of caterpillars. There's so much we have to learn about the natural world. And children are having great ideas, to live in a more sustainable way. I find that girls in America, they've got to have a new dress every time they go out to a dance. I was talking in a group the other day with a monk, and a Buddhist monk, and he was in his robes, and I was wearing a green shirt that I've had for ages. And at the end, we showed a film. You've seen the film where the chimp is released and embraces me. It was taken 10 years ago. And I said to him, look, that is the same shirt that I'm wearing today. And I said, you're so lucky because you're a monk and you don't have to buy new robes all the time.
Or to think about what you are going to wear every day.
Right, I know. I would like to be an animal with fur. Never have to dress at all.
Would be wonderful. Sorry, guys, that's the end of the question. I would just add a last thing to this conversation. I think we can thank Jane a lot, and before you do, I think the best way to thank Jane is to roll up our sleeves and to do whatever we can to change this world. I mean, too many times we're thanking people like Jane. Oh, thank you for what you're doing for us. She cannot be alone doing that. She's giving you energy to do that yourself. So thank you for doing that.
Merci.
Thank you, Jane.
Merci infiniment. Merci beaucoup Cyril Dion. Merci Jane Goodall. Merci à toutes et tous. Je vous souhaite une belle fin de journée et je veux remercier spécialement le Jane Goodall Institute France qui nous a permis de vivre ces 2 heures, vous l'avouerez, exceptionnelles. Vous êtes chez vous à l'UNESCO et donc je vous dis à très bientôt.